What is up, Ewu crew? Today, we're covering the chilling story of the Perron family and the old Arnold estate, which most of you may know as the house from the 2013 blockbuster, The Conjuring. If you enjoy true crime, mysteries, and true stories, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Now, let's get into it. The real story behind the movie franchise The Conjuring begins with a rural farmhouse in Rhode Island. Built in 1736, it has gone by many names over the years, including the Dexter Richardson House and the Old Brook Farm. When the Perron family purchased it in 1971, though, it was known as the Old Arnold Estate. In January 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron, along with their 5 daughters, Andrea, April, Christine, Cindy, and Nancy, moved into the Old Arnold Estate, located in the Rhode Island suburbs. A modest 14-room historic farmhouse situated on a 200-acre property. It seemed like an idyllic location to raise 5 children, and the perfect place for an all-American family to live. At first, everything seemed great. 13-year-old Andrea, the eldest of the Perron girls, had her own room while her sisters, 11-year-old Nancy and 10-year-old Christine, shared another. The 2 youngest girls, Cindy and April, also had another room to themselves. The house was big enough for all 7 members of the Perron family, providing ample space for the girls to play. However, even as their family settled into life at the Old Arnold Estate, Roger and Carolyn hadn't forgotten the final words of the man who had sold them the house. When dropping off the keys, he had mysteriously cautioned them to leave the lights on at night. Perhaps it had been a friendly warning from one neighbor to another. After all, America in the 1970s was rife with serial killers and gruesome crime sprees. But the man's sinister tone had sent chills down Roger and Carolyn's spines. And try as they might, they couldn't get his strange caution out of their minds. It wasn't long before several mysterious and unexplainable things started happening inside their home. The house itself creaked, slammed, and whispered. Carolyn also started noticing that things frequently went missing, with the broom seemingly moving by itself from place to place around the house. More than that, though, she heard scraping sounds against the kettle, despite the fact that no one was in the kitchen at the time. She would also find small piles of dirt in the center of the kitchen floor, even though it had been thoroughly cleaned only a few hours before. In an interview, Cindy Perron, the second youngest daughter, said, "Things would either be moved all around in a different position than how I left them, or they would all be shoved up underneath the bed. And I would go to my sisters, of course you'd go to your sisters, and ask, 'Hey, what'd you do to my toys?' And they'd say, 'Nothing. Why would I mess with your toys, Cindy?' No one discussed any of these events until much later." Andrea also had her fair share of disturbing experiences. As the eldest of the 5 sisters, she was woken many times in the middle of the night by her siblings coming into her room, huddling with her on her bed as they sobbed their hearts out. 8-year-old Cindy, in particular, claimed that she could hear a menacing voice in the room that she shared with April. A voice that whispered, "There are 7 dead soldiers in the walls," over and over again. Almost immediately after moving in, all 5 sisters noticed their house seemed alive with spirits, although most of them were harmless, if not benevolent. They weren't always frightened of the ghosts and even befriended one of them, calling him Manny. According to Cindy, "When we first moved into the house, for the first 2 months, there was a woman that came and kissed me every night on the forehead that I thought was my mother." Her older sister Andrea added, "Mom smelled like ivory soap, and the spirit smelled like flowers and fruit." Some spirits, however, were more threatening. For instance, the family was kept awake at night by a voice crying out for its mother, and at exactly 5:15 a.m., their beds would be lifted by an unseen force. The stink of rotting flesh permeated through the home, and there were even apparitions, as well as doors slamming shut on their own. Another article published in August 1977 in the Providence Journal reads, Mrs. Perrin said she awoke before dawn one morning to find an apparition by her bed, the head of an old woman hanging off to one side over an old gray dress. There was a voice reverberating, "Get out, get out. I'll drive you out with death and gloom." All these incidents soon proved to be too much for the Perrin family, and in a bid to understand what exactly was going on in their home, Carolyn allegedly began reading up on the history of the old Arnold estate. In her research, she purportedly came across information about how the property had at one point been owned by the same family for 8 generations, with many of the members dying under unexplainable or horrible circumstances, including drownings in a nearby creek, murders, and suicides. 8 generations of one extended family lived and died in that house prior to our arrival. Andrea Perrin would later say, some of them never left. According to the WJAR News, the Black Book of Burrillville, the town's former public records book, reveals that over the course of its existence, the property had been host to 2 suicides by hanging, 1 suicide by poison, the rape and murder of 11-year-old Prudence Arnold by a farmhand, 2 drownings, and the passing of 4 men who froze to death in addition to other tragic losses of life. However, claims regarding Prudence Arnold's death have been highly disputed, with local historians pointing to the fact that her official death record indicated that she died in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, which meant that she didn't lose her life on the farm. Furthermore, the record states her cause of death as her throat was cut by W.E.K., initials that contradicted the name of Bill Norton, which Andrea specified in her book. Some suspect Prudence's name and horrific death was included to help make sense of the reported hauntings. The Perrins were forced to remain in the old Arnold estate, as they had spent most of their money moving in and couldn't afford to relocate. The Perrins had to stay, and soon enough, the benevolent ghosts were replaced with a more violent and visible force. By far, the most sinister and the most harmful spirit in the old Arnold estate was a woman named Bathsheba Sherman. She was responsible for glass suddenly shattering and objects inexplicably being launched across the room, smashing dangerously into walls. This spirit seemed to be particularly furious at the presence of Carolyn Perrin. One night, as Carolyn sat in the living room, she suddenly felt a piercing pain in her leg. Looking down, she saw blood trickling from a small stab wound in her calf that looked as if it had been caused by a large needle. According to Andrea Perrin, whoever the spirit was, she perceived herself to be mistress of the house, and she resented the competition my mother posed for that position. Bathsheba constantly tormented Carolyn all throughout the 10 years that the family lived in the old Arnold estate. The torture was both emotional and physical. Aside from being stabbed in the leg, the spirit reportedly hid Carolyn's things all the time, which made her feel as if she was going insane. She also frequently felt drained and exhausted, making her heightened emotions even worse. Yet, on the other hand, Bathsheba was reportedly kind to Roger Perrin. The website History Collection even claims that he only saw Bathsheba's sweeter side, with loving caresses and innuendos. Later, the screenwriters and the director of the 2013 film, The Conjuring, would be most inspired by Bathsheba Sherman's torments, and based the majority of the film's plot on the horrors that she inflicted upon the Perrin family. While she may seem like a figure created specifically for Hollywood and the big screen, Bathsheba Sherman was very much real. Born in 1812 in Rhode Island, Bathsheba Thayer married fellow Rhode Islander Judson Sherman in Thompson, Connecticut on March 10, 1844. The couple were fairly well off, as Judson worked tirelessly on the land while Bathsheba stayed at home, tending to their son, Herbert, who was born in 1849. Some say that the Shermans had 3 other children, all of whom died before they reached the age of 7. However, no census records have been found to confirm the accuracy of these claims. Still, an unofficial record of the Sherman family tree claims that Judson and Bathsheba's 3 other children were Julia, born in 1845, Edward, born in 1847, and George, born in 1853. It's highly possible that these kids died before the next census was carried out and therefore not recorded. But again, no hard evidence has been found that either proves or disputes their existence. Despite the quiet and unassuming lives that they led, the Shermans were often the subjects of the local rumor mill. The townspeople believed that Bathsheba was a witch, or a practitioner of the dark arts, and they felt their suspicions were confirmed when a baby in her care died under mysterious circumstances. When an autopsy was performed, the medical examiner found horrifying evidence that the base of the infant's skull had been pierced with something long and sharp. Many claimed that this particular object had been a large sewing needle, and it had been done as part of a satanic ritual. Naturally, the locals started gossiping even more about Bathsheba and her alleged involvement with the occult, which spurred the court to take action against her. But with no proof that she had been the one to drive the needle into the infant's head, Bathsheba was quickly cleared of all charges and declared innocent. However, this didn't stop the townspeople from believing that the baby had been used as a human sacrifice to the devil. Bathsheba died on May 25, 1885, 4 years after her husband Judson passed away. The internet is rife with rumors that her body literally turned to stone the minute she drew her final breath. And there are also numerous posts online claiming that she had died from an unexplainable form of paralysis that left doctors both befuddled and frightened. The true cause of Bathsheba's death may never be known. However, her grave can still be seen and visited today at the historic Baptist Cemetery in downtown Harrisville, Rhode Island. Because of the lack of evidence regarding her alleged satanist activities, some believe that Bathsheba Sherman wasn't actually the malevolent spirit haunting the old Arnold estate and the Perrons. As well, Bathsheba did not actually live in the old Arnold estate, though the house existed. Rather, she lived in a nearby farm on the property. According to the Providence Journal, there are people who claim that the spirit violently haunting the old Arnold estate was actually Mrs. John Arnold, who had purportedly killed herself in the farm's barn in the 18th century. However, this argument is highly disputed, given the fact that historical records show that the only Mrs. John Arnold to have died in this manner had passed away in the 19th century, specifically in 1866. Moreover, she had committed suicide in her own home, situated about a mile away from the old Arnold estate. The link between the farm and the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman has never been proven. In fact, it had only been a suggestion made by famed paranormal investigator Ed and Lorraine Warren. Naturally, they couldn't pass up the opportunity to investigate the strange and malevolent things that were happening to the Perron family in the old Arnold estate. In the film, Carolyn Perron reached out herself to the famed paranormal investigators to ask them to look into strange occurrences in the family's home. In real life, though, it was a family friend who contacted the Warrens, who, at the time, were working on a case in nearby Connecticut. We never actually contacted the Warrens. Our friend, Barbara, went to see them in Putnam because they did things all around the area. They were informed about us, recalled Andrea Perron. The Warrens reportedly made multiple trips to the property over the 10 years that the family lived there. Unlike in the film, though, they weren't of much help. For instance, the hide and clap game, a chilling scene from The Conjuring that saw Lily Taylor as Carolyn Perron being tormented by a spirit, was allegedly much worse in real life. The hide and clap game was based on the games of hide and seek played by the daughters in real life. The horrible incident playing hide and seek occurred about 6 months after they moved into the old Arnold estate, when the young Cindy decided she would hide in the woodshed. In order to remain unfound by her searching sisters, she climbed into a wood box with a simple wood panel for a lid. Yet, reportedly, when she pulled the panel over top, she found she couldn't move it back off. Apparently, Cindy started screaming and shoving against the lid. She began panicking when it wouldn't budge. After 20 minutes of her terrified that she would suffocate in the box, her sister Nancy found her and easily lifted off the lid, freeing the hysterical Cindy. After hearing about the family's experiences, Ed and Lorraine suggested it was the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman who was haunting the parents. Carolyn had shared how she had been stabbed with a needle-like tool, and the Warrens pointed out the fact that Bathsheba had been accused of doing the same thing to a child while she had still been alive. The Warrens were also said to have claimed that Bathsheba Sherman had murdered her daughter as a sacrifice to Satan, establishing black rituals before taking her own life in a bid to remain on the property to haunt it forever. They also said that she had hung herself, which was why Carolyn Perrin often saw apparitions of a woman with a noose around her neck. In the Conjuring film, the Warrens managed to successfully remove the spirit of Bathsheba from the home, saving the lives of Carolyn and April Perrin in the process. But the real-life Ed and Lorraine Warren weren't that helpful. During one of their visits, they reportedly conducted a seance, accompanied by a priest and a medium, in an attempt to communicate with the spirits that had been tormenting the Perrin family. In the middle of the ritual, Karen allegedly became possessed by the spirit of Bathsheba, speaking in tongues and levitating. The 5 Perrin girls were banned from the seance. However, Andrea claimed to have secretly witnessed it. Writing in her memoir, "I thought I was going to pass out. My mother began to speak a language not of this world in a voice not her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room." Andrea's younger sister, Cindy, had also been hiding with her in order to watch the events unfold. She recalled the incident as dreadful, saying that, "The Warrens tried to help, but we essentially found things got worse around them." Concerned for his wife's mental stability, Roger Perrin threw the Warrens out and banned them from investigating the hauntings any further. A 77-year-old Roger Perrin later recalled, "She was possessed. Her entire body was distorted, and it lasted several hours until they de-demonized her, and then I threw the Warrens out." The family's torment continued until finally, in 1980, Roger and Carolyn were able to sell the old Arnold estate, settling in Georgia to rebuild their lives and never look back. Throughout those 5 years, though, the 5 girls did all that they could to escape the hauntings. However, one of the later owners of the old Arnold estate, a woman named Norma Sutcliffe, adamantly disagrees with the Perrins. She had purchased the property in 1987 and to this day claims that she has not been haunted, neither by the malevolent Bathsheba nor the benevolent spirits that the family claimed preyed on them. Norma had been living on the property when The Conjuring was released and even sued the film for damages caused by fans who frequently trespassed on the property. In 2019, the old Arnold estate was once again put on the real estate market and was purchased by Corey Heinzen and his wife, Jennifer. Unlike the previous owner, the couple claimed that they often experienced paranormal activity, including faraway footsteps and doors slamming. However, none of their ghostly encounters came close to what the Perrin family had experienced in the 1970s. Unlike the Perrins and Norma Sutcliffe, Corey and Jennifer have welcomed the spirits haunting the old Arnold estate with open arms. When they moved in, they claimed to have slept in the small wing of the home for the first 4 months, saying they didn't want to overstep their boundaries with the supernatural. When they finally opened the door between the main house and the small wing, though, they were awakened by a mysterious, shadowy figure. Corey recalled, "It was just peeking around the door like this, all black, just looking at us. I remember looking at it and Jennifer was like, 'What the hell is that?' I said, 'That's a shadow figure,' and it moved real fast. She said, 'Awesome,' and we high-fived each other." His wife Jennifer added, "It wasn't scary. It wasn't an evil presence. We were just excited." Even with the Heinzens asserting the presence of the supernatural in the old Arnold estate, there are still many who doubt its existence. Despite their critics, though, the Perrins remain adamant that their story is true. In an interview with USA Today, Andrea said, Both my mother and I would just as soon swallow our tongue than tell a lie. People are free to believe whatever they want to believe. But I know what we experienced. Lorraine claims to still feel traumatized by the events that transpired in the old Arnold estate, saying that the things that went on there were just so incredibly frightening. It still affects me to talk about it today. One of her most outspoken detractors, though, is Stephen Novella, a neurologist and president of the New England Skeptical Society. A longtime critic of the Warrens and their work, he was once quoted as saying, "The Warrens are good at telling ghost stories. You could do a lot of movies based on the stories they have spun. But there is absolutely no reason to believe there is any legitimacy to them." Despite the criticism, the Perron family was supportive of the movie. In an interview, Andrea Perron stated that, "The cast is perfect. The children resembled us as children and have our personalities as children." She further praised director James Wan, saying that he managed to capture the essence of what she and her family had gone through. Many continue to be fascinated by The Conjuring and the alleged real events that inspired the horror movie, despite the movie having been released years ago in 2013. In a top-rated comment on Reddit, user Non-Corporeal Entity writes, "The Warrens were well known for fabricating stories and details in order to sensationalize a haunting for media attention and book sales. Every haunting they investigated was claimed to be a demonic possession. It's also no coincidence that all of the people involved in their most famous cases were in financial trouble and at risk of losing their home." Despite these naysayers, though, many continue to believe that the Perron family was genuinely tormented by the malevolent spirit of Bathsheba Sherman.